My name is Ben David, and I'm the District Attorney for New Hanover and Pender County. I am joined by John David, District Attorney for Brunswick, Bladen, and Columbus counties. I'm also joined by Sheriff Bill Rogers of the Columbus County Sheriff's Office and his command staff, as well as Chief Donnie Williams, Chief of Police for the Wilmington Police Department. Brian House is the ALE Director for the state of North Carolina. He will be making remarks in just a minute. And as you can see, we have a wonderful group of professionals from these district attorneys' offices and law enforcement agencies. And we're here today to send a very important message. Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. You know, we are talking today about nuisance abatement, and we're specifically talking about how to proactively prevent crime and not just respond to it. We're talking about making sure that we fight crime by building community. It doesn't matter if it's a motel in Market Street that's become a den of iniquity, or a drug home in Rocky Point, or a nightclub in the central business district of this fair city, or an entire street gang operating in Wilmington. We have used these nuisance abatement laws historically to make sure that we are going to proactively prevent the crime that is occurring in our communities. These cases hinge upon community involvement and cannot happen without the participation and support from community members, because the petitions that we file, these complaints that we take to these judges, require that all other law enforcement efforts have failed, that these cases drain vital resources, and we now need the help of civil enforcement and not just the criminal enforcement. Today we're talking about shutting down two different places: the Edge nightclub here in Wilmington, as well as Balls, which is a nightclub, an illegal nightclub that was operating in Columbus County. What you will hear about these places is that they were hotbeds for criminal activity. Just for instance, at the Edge nightclub, it was the site of a homicide, several shootings, drug violations, illegal alcohol sales, and gang activity. It was eating up the neighborhood. And now, thanks to the consent judgment that has just been signed by Superior Court Judge, the Honorable Frank Jones, this property can never again be operated as a nightclub, restoring order to that neighborhood. No business can operate after 9 p.m. or before 6 a.m., and no alcohol can be sold on that premises for at least the next 5 years. You know, over a decade ago, when we had a murder in downtown Wilmington, and at the time was the Rhino nightclub, we shut that place down in 24 hours that had been a hive for illegal activity, particularly underage drug sales and alcohol sales and gang activity. And what we found when we shut down the Rhino, that is now Slice of Life Pizzeria, it immediately reinvented itself at Club 609, where there was another murder related to the first one just a couple of months later. And then when we used the same nuisance abatement laws to shut down that activity, it went across the bridge into Columbus County, and those same nightclub operators were operating on a farm where a double murder happened. What we have seen through the years is that bad guys don't respect jurisdictional boundaries, and they've always taken advantage of the cat and mouse game that can be when you go from one place to the other. So this bridge serves as a backdrop to the coordinated regional approach that we have always taken. Whether it's the geographic size of Rhode Island that I'm so privileged to represent, or the geographic size of Delaware that is Brunswick, Bladen, and Columbus County. What we are saying for all of Southeast North Carolina, with these 113 agents of the ALE and all these local law enforcement agencies that my brother and I are so privileged to give law enforcement support to through Article 4, Section 18, which says we're their legal advisors. We are telling career criminals and those who would do harm through drug sales, gang activity, and illegal operation of these nightclubs that there is truly nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. For more on that, I'm going to call upon John David to make additional remarks, and then Chief Brian House, the ALE Director. And if you have any questions after that, we're happy to try and answer them. Thank you.
Thank you, brother. And I want to thank the members of the media here today to help us honor and celebrate a relationship which is so important, not just to district attorneys in this region, but indeed district attorneys in all 100 counties of the Tar Heel State. The Nuisance Abatement Team is a precious and limited resource. It consists of merely 5 officers who have the awesome responsibility of covering the entire state. And despite the fact that they must be stretched very thin, they've always been incredibly responsive to our needs here in Southeastern North Carolina. And so I want to highlight some of our accomplishments that we've collectively achieved together over the years. But before I do that, I want to talk about why that matters. Because simply stated, the traditional tools of law enforcement, standing alone, are inadequate to address the root causes of crime. Too often, our law enforcement partners are responding to overdose deaths and to crime scenes involving homicides after the crime has occurred. And so about 20 years ago, my brother and I shifted our focus away from the result, what had just happened, and towards why it was happening. We began to examine the surrounding circumstances that were allowing criminality at this level to occur. And we're able to really isolate 2 variables. Frequently, what we began to notice is that we were dealing with known drug houses and illegal nightclubs. And so using civil laws, we aggressively targeted those areas that are known crime hotspots in our communities with the hope that we would proactively prevent crime before it occurs rather than just showing up and making sense of it in a courtroom after the tragedy that occurs. As Ben has already pointed out, I'm the district attorney in an area the size of the state of Delaware. Brunswick, Bladen, and Columbus counties collectively are over 200 square miles. And the challenges are somewhat different than here in urban core that is downtown Wilmington. New Hanover County is the second smallest of the 100 counties and the most population dense. In the rural counties where I'm fortunate enough to be DA, the dynamics are similar, but the challenges can be very different. In those counties, we deal with isolation mixed with alcohol, gangs and guns. When you stir in the variables of an unregulated industry, you have a toxic cocktail that frequently results in death. Too often we see illegal nightclubs, which, driven by social media, can get very popular very quickly, become a place where bad things happen, where everybody saw it and nobody saw nothing, and by the time law enforcement arrives, we're picking up the pieces of shattered lives. So what we began to do years ago is embark upon a strategy, surgical strikes within our communities for the known places where problems were occurring. I'm so grateful to Sheriff Rogers and the Columbus County Sheriff's Office for being a partner with me in this effort. I could not do it without the men and women of law enforcement, our first responders to the worst cases as they're unfolding in our communities, who have the wisdom to recognize that we must target these areas in the calm of cool of the daylight hours, lest they be problems in the nighttime in our communities. Now, Ball's Nightclub is something that first jumped onto my radar screen not long after becoming district attorney in 2010. It was in 2012 that we had a homicide on this property. It was a house that was operating in an illegal fashion, serving alcohol to folks. And when someone died there, we finally decided to meet with the property owners and through their consent place significant restrictions on that property that run with the land and speak throughout time to limit their use and enjoyment of that property, with the end goal of being that they could no longer operate a nightclub on that area. Now, since that meeting occurred with those property owners in 2012, we have had now 4 different sheriffs. After Chris Batten, his chief deputy Lewis Hatcher replaced him, Jody Green became the sheriff, and now Bill Rogers. And while the personalities can change, the mission never does. Justice speaks through time, and so does this legal document. And so it was that in the last year, when they thought no one was looking, the property owners sort of woke back up and began using this nightclub again in an illegal fashion. It's really just an old abandoned house that they had repurposed towards a criminal use. In the last year, we had 3 separate shooting incidents on that property. And so it was that the long arm of the law stretched all the way from Raleigh with ALE. We resurrected this document that was signed so long ago, recently met with the property owners and confronted them with a choice. No longer are we merely going to restrict your property, we're going to demolish it. If you don't agree to that, we're going to go back into the courtroom and we're going to seek to take it from you. Now, law enforcement is not in the property management business. It is not our goal to take people's property from them. We simply want to ensure that people are using it in a lawful purpose and not creating an environment such that bad things occur. And so I stand here today grateful for this relationship that we have with ALE. I'm indebted to Director Brian House for his leadership and for allowing us to utilize this precious and limited resource of the nuisance abatement team so much and so often over the time that I've been district attorney here in the Cape Fear region. So with that, I will turn it over to Director House, and following his remarks, we'll answer some questions on your behalf. Director House.
Hey, good morning. My name is Brian House, and I have the privilege of serving as the Director of North Carolina Alcohol Law Enforcement. ALE at full strength, we have 111 special agents to cover all 100 counties. But within the North Carolina Alcohol Law Enforcement Division, we have a small team of specially trained agents who are our nuisance abatement team. They consist of only 5 agents to cover all 100 counties. And they are very good at applying a civil law to effect change at locations that have been operating as a detriment to communities across the state. I want to take the opportunity to thank District Attorney Ben David, District Attorney John David, Sheriff that is here today of Columbus County, Sheriff Rogers, and Wilmington Police Department, Chief Williams. We are only effective at serving in this role with the partnership of these law enforcement agencies as well as the communities we serve. Thank you.
We'll say we have prepared a press release that is going to be going out simultaneously with this conference that explains a little bit more of the action that was taken against both of these places, but we're happy to try and answer any questions. Do want to give a special shout out to the team of men and women that are actually getting the work done. I know Jason Smith behind me, senior prosecutor, as well as Sean Spearing, Justin Morgan with ALE, and of course Rebecca Deans, who is on that nuisance abatement team, worked tirelessly with some of the men and women of the WPD who are here. It's just not possible without their great work. And as it relates to making sure that the laws are fairly and evenly enforced, we try to work with these property owners. Just getting back to the Edge nightclub, there was a nuisance abatement action filed against them in July of 1999 that put restrictions on this property. And just as my brother was talking about that happened at the Balls nightclub, things slid into disrepair over the years. And so we had to take more corrective action this time around. And you will see that the consent judgment that was just signed put some very big guardrails in place. I want to thank the people in the community who saw something and said something. They actually came forward, filed affidavits with the court to say this is not the place we want to live in. And it's simply become an intolerable area for an otherwise great neighborhood. We are returning that neighborhood to the people who live there today. And we're going to continue to aggressively use these laws to go after violent and career criminals, because at the end of the day, at our very best, this ounce of prevention is truly worth a pound of cure. We see the tragedies. You see them as well. You will not be reporting on the murder that doesn't happen. But I am confident that this action is saving lives. It is preventing some of the 10 overdose deaths that we have each day in North Carolina. It is preventing some of the 2 a week in my district. It is preventing that drunk driver from getting in that wreck up the road. And it is no longer the hotspot for gang activity that is eating up these neighborhoods at 3 in the morning and 3 in the afternoon. At our very best, this partnership is really about reaching upstream to prevent the tragedies we see down it. We don't want these things washing on our shores at the courthouse. And that's why we salute the ALE and the men and women of Wilmington Police Department and the Columbus County Sheriff's Office, because without this proactive stance, we know we would be much busier at the courthouse. Questions for any of us? Yes, Zach?
Starting with the Edge Lounge. So exactly what happens to the property now? Does it go into the city, to the county, and what's next for it?
So that action was threatened. We got a consent judgment filed, which means the existing property owner has agreed to very restrictive terms. They cannot operate that place as a nuisance in the future or reopen somewhere else. And to be clear, they can't sell the property to somebody else and then it cures it. This is a designation that runs with the property. So when we said that there's no alcohol sales allowed for at least 5 years, it doesn't matter if they sold it tomorrow. The same thing with not operating a business before 6 a.m. or after 9 p.m. And the same thing that it can never be a nightclub at any time in the future. It doesn't matter if they continue to hold this property or sell it to others. They bought this property from others way after that 1999 nuisance abatement filing. But like I said, it slid into disrepair, and you've reported on the murder that occurred there. And that trial, by the way, is July 29th, and I invite the community to watch that murder trial and accessory after the fact trial that we're trying to join, that will be happening. But instead of trying murder cases, we're trying to prevent them today. And every responsible property owner should feel the same. And that's exactly the same action we took with the motels in Market Street. It's what we took with the Gangster Disciples. It's what we've taken in drug houses in Pender County. It's what we've taken with illegal clubs that were operating in the Central Business District. We're going to go anywhere where this threat is and meet it. And we're going to engage property owners to say, if you want what's best for your property in your neighborhood, you should have no problem with these terms. And if you don't, we're going to take that property, we're going to demolish it, and we're going to start over, because we are not going to have this blight in our community.
So would it be fair to say that that would be the next step for the Edge?
Yes, if they don't comply with these terms, it could be. And I'm going to turn it over to John to talk a little bit more about what they're doing with the property in Columbus County. John?
Well, first of all, I would say in Columbus County, we've had the opportunity to issue nuisance abatements against motels, apartment complexes, and indeed houses. And the Balls nightclub was basically a residential structure that was converted to an unlawful use and was used, again, as a nightclub over the years. In 2012, following that murder, we put restrictions on the property. In lieu of a hearing, the owner at that time consented to that outcome. Over the arc of time, however, he, like happened here in Wilmington, conveyed the property to others. He has 5 children and gave them all a ownership share in that property, as well as numerous grandchildren. We were convinced that that was done in an effort to frustrate our ability to take further legal action against it. But let me be clear, when we signed this document that is actually drafted by the ALE legal team for our signatures, using aggressive civil laws that exist in this state, they speak throughout time. And what our frequent pattern has been is to work with people initially, but if they break the terms of that agreement, to sort of ratchet up our enforcement mechanisms. Now, with respect to Balls nightclub, what we're going to do next is we are going to demolish the property. And we're actually going to use it as a teaching moment with the homeowner's consent for the men and women of our firefighting community in Columbus County. We're going to have a burn in that area where they use it as a structure fire. And it will be burned to the ground in the next 60 days. And should they refuse to do that, we're going to go to a court where the issue will be contested on its merits. And should the judge rule in our favor, the property would be converted to a state use and given to the school system of Columbus County. So that's generally the remedy that we provide for in the initial consent decree, that a violation would trigger a transfer of ownership to the school board of the county where the incident occurred. Are there any other questions?
I just want to speak more specifically to Wilmington as well, Ben. I know some city council members have expressed some concerns recently about other nightclubs downtown, especially right there on Front Street,
Yes.
like Pravda, where there was a shooting a couple of weeks ago. What are some other efforts? Are there any other properties that have been identified? And what's the remedy like? And is this just trying to send a message?
Sure, Zach, that's a great question. And you know, when a terrible crime occurs, and that was the first murder in Wilmington this year, and I hope everyone's knocking some wood right now. We're really on a good run. And we need to try and keep the peace out there. But it sometimes opens up a much larger issue, and that is there illegal activity that's festering in this place that might contribute to a dangerous environment? So that's frequently how we're alerted. Without getting into the facts of a pending case, I'll tell you that there are several places throughout New Hanover and Pender County that are on our radar screen. What we typically do, we have to get the surrounding community around a business establishment, a neighborhood, to come forward and help. Because again, officers are paid to take on the risks that the rest of us run from. And it's not merely when something is a place for illegal activity, because that happens hundreds of times a month. It's whether traditional law enforcement efforts have failed because there is such a repeated historical pattern of criminal violations. So when a bad thing happens, Zach, what we do is not only look at that incident, but we pull call records. We look at the 911 call center. How many times have we received calls for help? How many times have we done, knock and talks or field incident reports? How many times have we violated people on probation? How many times have we involved ALE agents with compliance for alcohol for their license? We take all of those things into account, and in some of the more extreme cases, that's when we take the next step of filing these civil actions. There are places in downtown Wilmington, there's places throughout New Hanover County and into Pender County that are under active investigation. And just for anyone listening, if the ALE or one of these local law enforcement agencies comes forward to try and seek your assistance about something that may have happened even years in the past, that's what we do. There's no statute of limitations on felonies, and there's certainly no statute of limitations on looking back at criminal conduct to show this pattern of activity. So sometimes when we knock on that door, we are looking at behavior not that just happened last night, but might have happened even several years ago to establish this pattern of conduct. And that's currently what we're doing at some of these other places.
And of course, when folks find themselves in these spaces where criminal activity is happening, obviously you guys want them to see something, say something. So how can they report crime if they see it happen in these spaces?
Sure. Well, in Wilmington, I think the chief would say text-to-tip has been extremely effective. That's an anonymous way to report criminal activity and to otherwise stay out of it. And I know a lot of people are reluctant. Of course, calling 911 is always a good thing. And then, when we have these more sprawling investigations, and we're usually working during the business day for that, if we come and ask for your assistance, this is getting down to what kind of community do you want to live in? Do you want to live in a place that tolerates criminal activity, that cars are going up and down your street at all hours of the night, where kids can't even ride their bikes? That's what we're really talking about. It takes all of us. So it's kind of in the flavor of a crime watch neighborhood that we do some of our best work, where we knock on doors and proactively build the witness pool that way. But if particularly if they're seeing something in the moment, reach out for help immediately by calling 911, text a tip, and report it to the nearest law enforcement agency.